Every place has a history. Every headline has a past. Every generation inherits a story. Welcome to Simply History. I'm your host, Mr. Robbins. Let's find out how we got here. In our last episode, we explored North America before European contact, a continent filled with native nations, cities, trade networks, governments, and cultures. Today, that world collides with Europe and West Africa. What follows is not merely a story of explorers sailing into the unknown. It is the creation of an entirely new Atlantic world through trade and migration, but also through epidemic disease, conquest, forced labor, slavery, cultural exchange, and resistance. So our central question is, what caused Europeans to cross the Atlantic, and what were the consequences when sustained contact began? In 1491, the Americas were not an empty stage waiting for Europeans to arrive and begin the plot. Hundreds of native nations already lived across the continents. They maintained farms, cities, confederacies, roads, and long-distance trade. Europe was changing as well. War and plague had weakened parts of the old feudal order. West Africa contained powerful kingdoms, merchants, and its own complex trading systems. Period 1 is the meeting and often violent entanglement of indigenous Americans, Europeans, and West Africans on lands already occupied and governed by native peoples. Why did European rulers begin looking outward? The Crusades increased demand for Asian luxury goods. The Black Death disrupted feudalism. The Renaissance encouraged scholarship. Stronger monarchies now possessed the money to sponsor ambitious expeditions. We often summarize motives as God, gold, and glory, convenient and suspiciously tidy. Religion mattered too, but the timeline needs care. The Protestant Reformation began after Columbus's first voyage, so it did not cause the voyage of 1492. It later intensified competition between empires. Motivation alone won't get you across an ocean. For that, you need technology. Sailors used magnetic compasses for direction, astrolabes and quadrants to estimate latitude, and portolan charts to follow coastlines. The caravel combined maneuverability with the ability to handle Atlantic conditions. One technology helped people cross an ocean. The other helped investors survive when those people failed to come back. Columbus was supported by the Spanish monarchy. Joint stock companies became major engines of English colonization in the following century. And while we are discussing sound investments, please like and subscribe to the channel. It helps Simply History reach more curious people. In 1492, Christopher Columbus reached Guanahani, a Taino island in the Caribbean. He wrote a widely circulated letter advertising the voyage. It reads partly as a travel report and partly as a sales pitch to royal investors. In 1494, Spain and Portugal signed the Treaty of Tordesillas. They placed a dividing line west of the Cape Verde Islands. Spain claimed lands west, while Portugal claimed the east, including Brazil. And, once again, notice who was not invited to the negotiations. The millions of people whose lands Europe had just divided. Sustained contact triggered what historians call the Columbian Exchange, the movement of plants, animals, people, diseases, and cultures between the Eastern and Western hemispheres. It reordered economies and ecosystems on a global scale. But the deadliest items crossing the Atlantic were invisible. Horses, cattle, pigs, and sugar traveled west. Corn, potatoes, and cacao traveled east. These transformed diets and transportation worldwide. European livestock damaged indigenous fields. Sugar created demands for land and labor. American crops supported global population growth. but pathogens were the most devastating exchange. Between 1519 and 1521, Hernán Cortés helped overthrow the Mexica-led Aztec Empire. Spanish steel and horses mattered, but Cortés did not act alone. Thousands of indigenous allies, especially Tlaxcalans who opposed Mexica power, were essential. Malintzin served as translator and negotiator. The Lienzo de Tlaxcala helps us see the conquest from a Tlaxcalan viewpoint and reminds us that Spanish against native is far too simple. Disease also transformed the balance of power. Smallpox and measles entered populations with no previous exposure. Catastrophe, however, did not mean disappearance. Native nations survived and adapted. Conquest created colonies, and colonies demanded labor. Under the encomienda system, the crown granted the right to collect tribute and demand labor from indigenous communities. In practice, the system produced violence and coerced labor in mines and plantations. One important correction: it was not technically a grant of land. The encomienda concerned control over tribute and labor. Land was acquired separately. And notice, encomienda, forced tribute, indigenous slavery, and African slavery overlapped. History rarely changes systems as cleanly as a PowerPoint animation. African slavery expanded as native populations experienced catastrophic losses. Europeans worked with African merchants, but the system also destabilized African societies and provoked opposition. In 1526, Afonso I, King of Congo, protested to Portugal that traders were kidnapping even nobles. Enslaved Africans also resisted immediately, forming maroon communities. Agency does not erase suffering. Afonso's letter reminds us that African rulers were active political participants. Enslaved Africans escaped, revolted, and preserved their traditions in independent maroon communities. Suffering must not erase agency. Spanish colonial society also developed a racial hierarchy, the casta system. The casta system placed peninsulares, people born in Spain, at the top. American-born Spaniards, or Creoles, occupied another category. Indigenous, African, and mixed ancestry people faced discrimination. But this hierarchy was not perfectly fixed. Status could depend on wealth, occupation, and reputation. Race was organized. The categories were invented legal tools to justify unequal access to power. But interaction also produced adaptation. Native peoples selectively adopted useful metals, animals, and legal strategies. The Huechotzinco Codex shows indigenous plaintiffs using pictographic records within a Spanish court to defend their interests. That is not passive assimilation. Resistance appeared wherever colonial power appeared. In 1597, Guale communities rose in Juanillo's revolt. At Acoma Pueblo, resistance led to catastrophic Spanish retaliation. Spain also debated the morality of conquest. Bartolomé de las Casas condemned slavery, while Sepúlveda defended domination. Their arguments were presented at Valladolid. The debate did not stop conquest, but it proves that people contested its legitimacy from the beginning. Resistance was constant. At Acoma Pueblo, the retaliation was intended to punish through terror. Yet native nations survived, adapted, and remain here today. Here is the causal chain: motive, means, contact, exchange, conquest, labor, hierarchy, resistance. Remember, Tordesillas divided claims. Joint stock was for later English colonies. Encomienda was labor, not land. Contact didn't just connect worlds, it created a new one through violence, adaptation, and survival. By 1607, another experiment was beginning at Jamestown. For the comments, tell me which consequence of contact changed world history most. Crop exchange, disease, conquest, or forced labor? I'm Mr. Robbins, and this has been Simply History. I'll see you next time. Like and subscribe to spread the journey.